Chapter 215. At this moment, in a nation on the continent of Australia, under a sunset as red as blood, a military transport aircraft had completed its mission of soldier transportation and lay silent on the airfield. Beside it, tens of thousands of soldiers stood in perfect formation, all silent as the grave. The commander, in his military uniform, after a moment of contemplation, resolutely stood before his troops and began to declare, "These days, everyone is risking their lives on the front lines. I know many of you have lost loved ones, friends, because the people need us. Like you, both my son and daughter have fallen on the battlefield against Austerlitz." His voice suddenly paused for a second, then powerfully rang out again. "There are still many people trapped in various cities waiting for our rescue. Each subsequent mission will be a dead end. Are you ready to carry out these missions, even if it means sacrificing your own lives?" His heroic declaration was immediately answered with a resounding chorus that shook the heavens and the earth. "Ready!" And then, the commander's order echoed, "Depart!" Hundreds of military helicopters began to take off, collectively carrying tens of thousands of young soldiers to the battlefield, some of whom had not even found love yet. At Misty Mountain, the fissure continued to pour out endless spiritual power, but it seemed that the fissure was getting smaller and smaller. Now, the fissure was only about several meters wide. The divine tree opened its eyes, then immediately squinted to observe this fissure. The divine tree knew that this tide of spiritual power seemed to be ending soon. Based on the rate of the fissure's contraction, it seemed there was only one day left. Thus, the war was very near. Thinking of this, the divine tree began to lift its roots, preparing to act. In a country being invaded by the beasts of the Australian core, these mutated rhinoceroses began to attack a shelter. The rhinoceros species was originally gentle in nature, but after joining the Australian core, they were ready to kill at the command of the Dark King. The people inside had observed these beasts through surveillance cameras. They knew that the beasts had tracked their scent here, but they still clung to hope in the super-thick steel door. As long as the door was sturdy enough, they would be safe. All the people were extremely tense at this moment, sweating profusely. No one dared to speak for fear of making a sound to attract the beasts. Suddenly, a red-eyed rhinoceros sniffed the air, sensing something amiss. It immediately pointed its sharp snout at the steel wall in front of it. The people inside were terrified. "They're getting closer." Then heavy collision sounds echoed. Each collision shook the door violently. After a few times, it started to crack. Could it withstand the dozens of tons of force from the rhino's charges? Inside, a bearded old man held his daughter in his arms, his angry eyes staring through the door. The frightened little girl clung tightly to her father, incessantly calling Baba. Just then, a rhino, teased by its peers, hurled itself at the door, creating a loud noise accompanied by the sound of shattering. The people immediately bent their knees and ran. Their reflexes were indeed professional. This red-haired guy seemed to have experience, telling everyone to stay away from that door and run to the other door, to escape outside opportunistically. Sure enough, the mutated rhinos appeared next. They roared terrifyingly, their red eyes bloody. The first people who saw them were immediately scared to death. A few unlucky ones were directly trampled to death. They began their massacre, opening their large mouths and biting any human nearby. Because the crowd was too large, some people couldn't retreat in time and could only become prey for the rhino monsters. The rhinos' roars got louder and louder, noisier and noisier, as they kept charging in. The old man carried his daughter and ran with the crowd. In fact, this father had always been vigilant, ready to run with his child at any movement. Therefore, he managed to escape with the first group of people. The fleeing crowd screamed. Everyone showed a face of horror. It was indeed a desperate run. The bearded old man still had a gloomy face. His eyes were bloodshot. He held his daughter and kept running, without complaining a word. Perhaps the old man knew that complaining would only interrupt his breath and make his body more tired. Damn it! Just as they ran to the emergency exit, two huge, mutated wolf heads poked down from above. They breathed their foul breath into their faces. Their eyes glowed with a bloodthirsty, deadly light. The crowd stood frozen in fear. Now they couldn't advance or retreat. Behind them, The rhinos were chasing. In front of them, the monster wolves were blocking the way. The wolf in front began to open its mouth to bite. The crowd screamed in panic. Everyone ran in different directions, running chaotically. Only the old man holding his daughter stood still there, seeing two streams of people running in two directions in the tunnel and starting to jam. Indeed, they were like fish on the chopping board. The old man only truly felt completely trapped at this moment, feeling that he and his daughter had no way out. He didn't mind dying himself, but his daughter still had a future ahead of her. Thinking of the bitter truth, the old man could only grit his teeth. Then, the two wolves in front of them truly advanced and devoured the first people. A horrifying scream echoed once again. The terrified little girl could only tightly close her eyes and cling to her frail father. The father's heart pounded with fear, and at this moment, his only wish was that even if he had to die, please save his daughter. At the most critical moment, a series of semi-automatic rifle shots rang out deafeningly. Firepower poured onto the faces of the mutant wolves, blasting their heads to pieces. Their advance was immediately halted. The army had arrived. The brave soldiers moved forward while pulling the trigger, creating a powerful rain of firepower. Then, the soldiers opened a path for the civilians to escape from this place. Meanwhile, other soldiers were still enthusiastically shooting and reloading. They might not be able to completely eliminate the enemy, but in this confined space, they could certainly slow down the large enemy steps because they couldn't dodge the bullets wrapped in spiritual power. The civilians escaped outside and ran as if flying. The successful evacuation of the civilians. A string of 6 grenades was thrown into the tunnel. The explosion shook the ground. A red flame spurted from the cave mouth. Thus the monsters were completely buried inside. At this moment, at the place where the refugees were gathering, a huge cargo plane was landing. These guys immediately shed tears. Finally, after so much hardship, they didn't have to die here. The plane slowly stopped, and the civilians boarded the plane one by one. Unfortunately, this plane couldn't carry everyone. The soldier ordered them to stop because the plane had reached its limit. This guy immediately became disappointed and asked when the next flight would be. The soldier, with a haggard and gloomy face, finally stuttered out, This is the last flight. Then the government will drop spiritual power bombs to cause a big fire around the city to prevent the monsters from advancing to other cities." Then the soldier paused for a few seconds and continued, "All the remaining people here will die in this city." Of course, this included him as well. As these words were spoken, the entire crowd fell silent. No, deathly silent. Then, a few people couldn't accept this reality. Among them were children of all ages. An old man held his daughter tightly, trembling. He didn't tremble before, but now that they were safe on the plane, he started to shake violently. "It's okay, my dear. We're on the plane now," he reassured her. The old man had lost his wife and had silently vowed never to lose his daughter. But looking down below, a woman was holding a newborn baby. Her desperate eyes filled with tears as she looked up at the plane. The old man dared not look any further, but then an elderly man suddenly spoke in a trembling voice, "I won't go." He gave up his spot for the newborn baby. The young mother was shocked to hear this. The old man said he had lived long enough, and a few more years wouldn't make much difference. It would be better for the baby to get on the plane. And so, the newborn baby, with the face of a 20-year-old man, and his mother took the old man's place. The old man, trembling, slowly returned to the ground. Could the artist please make the baby's face look a bit more like a newborn's? End of chapter 2:15.